Hi everybody, I'm going to read the third part to the story Standing Stone, and you'll see that part 3 is called The Return, and there's also a picture of a hurley stick and the ball, the hurling ball. So let's start. So Louis and Cootie have just run back to run away from the book in part 2. And the book has accepted defeat. Louis and Cootie made their way back down the steps and along the passage to Menhir and Mr. Witheney's orchard. Outside, Cloudbird flew down to greet them. The sun was warm on Louis's face as he stroked Cloudbird on his shoulder. Reaching down to get his glass of water, Louis saw that the muffin was gone. "Knew you'd eat it," he said to Cloudbird. Cloudbird flew up into the tree and chortled at Louis. "Yeah, that's right, act all innocent," Louis said. He picked up the clippers and dragged the ladder over to a bush further down. Now to get some work done, he thought. As he stacked branches and twigs and chopped back bushes, he smiled to himself. Paddy and the rest of the Irish fairies were alive. After dinner, Louis sat down to finish his story. He thought about what Mr. Ngāwhāhu had said when he'd taken Cootie home after work. He'd said he often left the front door open for Cootie because she liked to lie on the doorstep and watch what was happening on Tui Street. "She never goes off alone like that," he'd said. "She obviously had something important to do with you, Louis." Louis hadn't told Mr. Ngāwhāhu that Cootie had helped him save the Irish fairies. He would tell Bessie, Jack and Tim at school tomorrow though. Louis picked up his pen and tapped it against his teeth for a minute, watching Cloudbird lift his head to sing on a puriri branch outside. He looked down at his paper, took a deep breath and began to write. One thing he knew about his story was that it was going to have a happy ending. When the Tui Street kids arrived at school the next day, Miss Brennan was lying on her back under the kōwhai tree with her legs and hands up in the air. Mr. Tamati stood beside her laughing. "She's trying to get me to lie on her feet and hands," he said to them. "She thinks she can hold me up." "She's pretty strong, Mr. Tamati," Jack said. "Thank you, Jack," Miss Brennan said. "I've lifted heavier people than you, Mr. Tamati." She looked over at the Tui Street kids. "Lucy, what have you got in your hand?" "It's a fence post," Lucy said. "We want to know if it could work as a hurley stick." I think it's too hard to hold on to," Terry said. "You can't really wrap your hand around it properly." Miss Brennan nodded. "You need a proper handle," she said. "I had to crawl under the deck to get this," Lucy said, her face scrunched in disgust. "It had cobwebs and dirt all over it." "It was a grand idea, Lucy," Miss Brennan said. "But it won't do for a hurley, trust me." "Well, I guess you can use these for your new fence, Louis," Lucy said. Terry looked at Louis. "I told Lucy about your rotten fence and how you want to build a new one." "Yeah, but remember, Terry, I don't know how to build a new fence," Louis said, "and Mum doesn't want me to do it because she thinks I might mess it up." "I know someone who's built a fence before," Mr. Tamati said. "Bet he'd be happy to help you too." "Who?" Louis asked. "Mr. W," Mr. Tamati said. "He built his own fence years ago." Louis looked at the fence post in Louis's hand. Do you have lots of those?" he asked her. Lucy nodded. "And Mum and Dad don't want them." "I'll ask Mr. W after school," Louis said. "How about I phone your mum at morning tea time and check that she's happy to have Mr. Witheney come over to do fence building with you," Mr. Tamati suggested. "That way you know it's fine to ask him." Louis nodded. "Okay." The bell rang. "Oh no," Mr. Tamati said. "Just when I was going to balance on Miss Brennan's feet and hands." Miss Brennan laughed. "Saved by the bell," she said. That weekend, Mr. Witheney came to Louis's house. He brought a drill, some screws, a hammer and some nails. Louis had carried the fence posts up from Lucy's and stacked them in their carport. During the day, the Tui Street kids came to help. Louie's mum made Mr. Withany sit down in a fold-up chair every now and then. She brought him cups of tea and sandwiches. Sometimes she sat and chatted with him, and Louie heard him telling her how impressed he'd been at Louie's hard work, and that his orchard was looking neat and tidy now. He said soon all the pruning would be done, and he'd miss having Louie come after school every day. Louie's mum told Mr. Withany he should come for dinner some night so that they could all keep in touch. At the end of the day, most of the new fence was up, and it wouldn't take long to finish it tomorrow. Louie's mum insisted that Mr. Withany eat dinner with them, and Louie was surprised at how much they had to talk about. They'd both travelled, and they both loved movies and gardening programs. After dinner, Louie and his mum walked Mr. Withany to the door. Outside, the Toy Street kids yelled, argued, and laughed as they played soccer and skateboarded. Louie wanted to join them. "I'll walk Mr. W up to the gate," he said, "and then, is it okay if I play outside for a while?" "I guess so," his mum said. "Just don't get hurt." "I'll be careful," Louie said. "Promise." He walked with Mr. Withany up the short pathway from his house to the footpath, and then decided he'd walk with him to the end of Toy Street. Cloudbird flitted from tree to tree beside him. At the top of Toy Street, Mr. Withany told him to head back and join his friends, but Louie didn't like leaving Mr. Withany just yet. Instead, he walked with him to his gate before turning back to Toy Street. The sun was setting, and Louie had noticed that since Bessie had come to live at her granddad's house, Mr. Ngauwhahu would wander down to walk back with her when it was getting dark. Usually, everyone else started heading home then too. Louie had watched Bessie and her granddad walk home together many times, just like he had with Mr. Withany this evening. Turning into Toy Street, he thought about his mother. She'd changed a bit. She was letting him do more stuff than she used to. Maybe his mum was changing like a story could, except that this wasn't an ending. It felt like a beginning, the beginning of something new. And that's the end of the Standing Stone story. But there is a little bit that is called the very end, which I'll do for you next. Okay, see you soon for the very end.